Welcome, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this panel. This is the first panel that is being presented by the Program in Georgian Studies at the Davis Center for Russian Eurasian Studies at Harvard University. We're very proud of this program. It took a long time to establish. We started in January of this year, and we're very proud to have three fabulous panelists to start us off. I want to mention to you that we will have two more panels this semester. Let me just give you some dates and topics so you know what's coming, and hopefully you can join us again. On March the 23rd, we will have a panel on a new book that was published called Georgia's Foreign Policy in the 21st Century, Challenges for a Small State. I was one of the co-editors. The others were Tracy German and Corneli Kakachia, published this January 2022. We're going to have a panel on the role of Georgia's foreign policy, obviously very topical right now. That will be on March the 23rd. And then on April the 6th, by the way, the same time, 12 to 1:30, on April the 6th, we will have a forum led by Helena Landemore, who is a professor of political science at Yale University. And she will be joined by co-panelist Georgi Derlugian, who is a professor of social research and public policy at New York University, and by Giga Zedania, who is the rector of Ilia State University. And it will be a forum on Helen Landemore's new book, published in 2020, called Open Democracy, about the different approaches to democracy and thinking about different ways to involve people and to get them to participate in their own lives and in Georgian society. So let's turn now to the panelists. We have three wonderful panelists. They all happen to be women, but that was only because they are the best specialists in the field. We will start the session with Tamara Griselidze. Tamara was Ambassador Extraordinary on Plenipotentiary of Georgia at the Holy See, the Vatican, from 2014 to 2018. Before that, she was a program executive at Faith and Order Secretariat at the World Council of Churches between 2001 and 2014. She is a doctor of philosophy. She got her PhD at the University of Oxford, and she has written and published many books and articles. She's one of the outstanding scholars in the field of the Orthodox Church of Georgia. I will just mention a couple of her publications. Georgian Monks on Mount Athos, Two 11th Century Lives of the Hegemony of Iveron. That was published in 2009. And a wonderful book that I use frequently in my classes, which she edited, called Witness Through Troubled Times, A History of the Georgian Orthodox Church, 1811 to the Present. And that was published in 2006. So that is Tamara. Thank you, Tamara, for joining us. Our other two panelists are Ketavan Gulciani, who is a professor of anthropology at Ilia State University in Tbilisi. Her specialty has been religiosity in everyday life. She has been a recipient of numerous research grants and awards from Georgian, German, and US-based foundations. Ketavan is also a prolific scholar, and I want to mention to you a couple of her most recent pieces. In 2021, she published an article called Women and the Georgian Orthodox Church. That was in a book edited by Ina Merjanova, and the name of the book is Women and Religiosity in Orthodox Christianity. That was published in 2021. And more recently, she published an article in Journal of Religion in Europe called Baptizing into Kin. So that is an example of Ketevan's recent work. And our third speaker is Eka Chitanava. And Eka has 2 degrees, an MA in journalism and an MA in sociology and social anthropology, the last from the Central European University. I've read many of her articles when she was working as a journalist. She's also done a lot of research at the Tolerance Center, her previous position, at the Public Defender's Office in Georgia. She, in 2013, founded the Tolerance and Diversity Institute, and she currently directs that institute. Many works and articles too. Let me just mention a couple for you. Actually, I'm going to mention the reports that the Tolerance and Diversity Institute produces, which are excellent reports. 2 of the recent ones that Eka has edited: Freedom of Religion or Belief in Georgia, a report that covers the years 2010 to 2020. This is published by the Tolerance and Diversity Institute. And secondly, Limitations to Freedom of Religion or Belief in Georgia, Legislation and State Policy. Again, one of those reports coming out of the Tolerance and Diversity Institute. So thank you, all 3 of you, very much for being with us. I'm going to ask Tamara to start the discussion. I asked her to give us some context, to talk about, in particular, the relations between the church and the state in Georgia. So Tamara, I'm going to hand it over to you. You have 15 minutes or so. All the speakers will have the same amount of time, which should leave us something like 20 to 30 minutes for questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat box, but in the Q&A. Thank you very much. Tamara.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon to all, and good evening to my co-panelists. I will give you, as Stephen said, a few hints about the complex relationship between the Orthodox Church of Georgia and Georgian state. But meanwhile, I have to say a few words about the war in Ukraine and the place of the Orthodox Church in it. These issues can run parallel to the church-state relations in Georgia. And I'll be using, during my presentation, PowerPoint presentation. Therefore, let me share screen. So, is it okay?
Yes.
Yes, all right. So, many people today express their position regarding the nature of this war in Ukraine. And some speak also about the role of Orthodoxy in it. Even though the understanding of its role in the ongoing war is measured differently, all agree that issues related to the Orthodox Church are implied in the pretext of the war. The cause and pretext of the Russian aggression is a very complex issue, embedded in a gradual estrangement between Kiev and Moscow from the 15th century onwards. So, political empowerment of Moscow was steadily attaining ecclesial authority at the expense of the situation in Kiev. So this tendency was finally formalized towards the end of the 18th century by including into the Russian Empire the Ukrainian lands and population, as well as the ecclesial reality or corporeality. After a very brief period of independence in 1917, then followed the Soviet era, in which all churches and religious institutions found themselves in a completely new place. Since the declaration of independence, though, of the Ukrainian state in 1991, Ukrainians were trying unsuccessfully to obtain autocephaly in Ukraine. And autocephaly translates as church's self-governance. In case of Kiev, it means independence from Moscow. It was only in 2019 that the Ecumenical Patriarch granted the Thomas of autocephaly, which was very badly received by Moscow at both levels, ecclesial and political. and it is still hanging as a huge unresolved problem within the Orthodoxy worldwide. To conclude on this, I'm repeating that issues related to the Orthodox Church are a part of the pretext of the war. Russia does not acknowledge sovereignty of the state and tries to keep it under its own cultural and spiritual authority, and to control from Moscow its huge Orthodox population. So there are many historic parallels with the situation in Georgia, with an important exception that Orthodox Church of Georgia claims its autocephaly from the early ages. It's debatable between 5th and 7th centuries, and the seat of its leader is in Georgia. But Russian Orthodox Church tries its best to keep church in Georgia under its surveillance, to keep it within the spheres of the Russian Orthodox influence. And the latter goes well, perhaps better than one would expect, although the other side of the complexity here suggests to take into account also church-state dynamics locally. So we move now to PowerPoint, looking at some aspects of church-state cooperation. I'll be now quoting here, and you'll see it on your screen, from the Constitution of Georgia. On relation between state and apostolic autocephalous Orthodox Church of Georgia, according to the 8th article of the latest version of the Constitution, it says, together with freedom of faith and confession, state recognizes outstanding role of the Apostolic Autocephalous Orthodox Church of Georgia in history of Georgia and its independence from state. Relation between the state of Georgia and the Apostolic Autocephalous Orthodox Church of Georgia is defined by constitutional agreement, which must fully correspond to the widely recognized principles of international law and regulations in the field of human rights and freedom. I would take your attention to two words in this text now. The first is that according to the Venice Commission, the critical comment went to the use here state instead of government. So the agreement should be not between, according to the critique, not between state and the church, but government instead. But anyway, it was left. And another word here is, which is highlighted in the text, outstanding. And this is perhaps not so common in the American, for the American audience, but in Europe, it is, some of European countries where Catholic Church is historically preeminent, constitutions mark the special role of the Catholic Church, for instance, in Poland, Spain, or Italy. So, constitutional, so we go now to this constitutional agreement, in particular, between the state of Georgia and the Apostolic Church of Georgia. And the agreement was signed by President of Georgia, Eduard Shevardnadze, and Catholicos Patriarch of all Georgia, Ilya II. And then it passed the approval of the parliament, as well as was accepted by the Synod of the Orthodox Church, confirmed in Tchetam, which was the ancient capital of Georgia, the historic seat of the church. And it was done on the 14th of October. And it was done on 14th of October in Tcheta on the premises of this cathedral, which is Svetischoveli Cathedral in Tcheta. So 14th of October is one of the national religious festivals in Georgia, dedicated to the day of this cathedral, Svetischoveli, which in Georgian means living pillar. So it's a legend that living pillar was used in order to build it up. And the present cathedral originates, as it says, from the 11th century, and since its erection, it's considered as the central seat of the Orthodox Church. So the spirit of identifying orthodoxy with nationalism at that time, which was, 2002, or even until today, would be taken for granted by a significant segment of the Georgian society. The opening of agreement endorsed the prevailing spirit of the document by saying, for example, in the preamble, that Orthodox Christianity historically was the state religion in Georgia, which had found centuries-old Georgian culture, national Weltanschauung, this word is used, and values. The Constitution of Georgia acknowledges the exclusive role of the Orthodox Church in the history of the nation and asserts its sovereignty from the state. So my first comment here goes about the word sovereignty, which is in the official translation of the document, but certainly it should be separation. Some other translations sometimes go as independent, but even that is not fully adequate. Separation of the church and state was observed in the first constitution of Georgia in 1921, which also prohibited using the budget of state or local self-governing bodies for religious purposes. Now we see on the screen now the excerpt from the first article of the agreement, which says that churches historically originated public legal person, a full legal public person recognized by the state that exercise its activities according to the ecclesiastical canon law, the Constitution of Georgia, the present agreement, and Georgian legislation. Well, so that the preamble, it endorses this, the first article endorses the spirit of the preamble, emphasizing the Orthodox Church being a historically originated public legal person and giving to it the national significance, to the religious significance. Appeal to numbers, which comes later in the agreement, that majority of Georgian population are Orthodox Christians, although it is a fact, adds to the spirit of exclusiveness on the grounds of religious nationalism. Then the other thing which I would like to add to this Orthodox nationalism is something which appears in Article 4. In agreement with the state, the Orthodox Church provides chaplaincies in the armed forces present at penitentiaries, therefore intends to adopt proper legal acts. So it's unclear here whether all soldiers of the armed forces in Georgia who are in need of the spiritual guidance shall be comforted by an Orthodox chaplain. So we go now to Article 5, which is about education, and Ketevan will comment on school education, but I would like to bring your attention to to what it says about Orthodox Church proposing curriculum planning, introducing changes into all the curricula, appointing or dismissing of teachers. So although the schools are free to use religious studies, but as soon as they use it, then Orthodox Church has access to this curricula, and probably Ketevan will say more about it. But I want to emphasize that the boundaries in this text are blurred, and although constitutionally Church cannot interfere into the state education, the interference is still happening to a certain degree, especially when it gets to the academic degrees. And we have some examples, and I can make more comments on it if you are interested later. But at the moment, I will only say that state education system is a part of the wider international constituency. For example, part of the Bologna process, on comparability and standards of higher education in Europe, which makes those frivolities unacceptable. I think, yeah. Article 6, 7, and 8, and 9, 4 articles actually, in the constitutional agreement refer to the biggest treasure of historic Georgia, ancient churches and ecclesial items. The agreement implies a pretext for an ambition to make claims regarding of ecclesial property, the national treasure. And state recognizes all Orthodox churches, their ruins and land within the state of Georgia as property of church. So it says ecclesial treasure as a part of the common national treasure is a joint property of state and church, being subject to acting law. This actually article causes some interesting debates in the Georgian society. For instance, church demands moving from state museum to churches some of the ancient icons or church items. And one of the recent examples of this is that the church is trying to move from the state museum to Anchishati Church, to which I had somewhere there, to Anchishati Church. This icon, which is here on your screen, which is a very old icon. It is from the 7th century inside the painting, and the frame is older. It's from the 12th century. And the church which was named after this icon, and it's on your screen up there. It's the 6th century church, and it was named later after this icon. So the church demands to move it back to where it belonged, they say. So a group of volunteers in the church organized collection of funds and ordered in Germany a special glass frame to keep the right temperature inside. It has been installed in the church and since last year, and from time to time, church comes back with a request to return the icon to its proper place. So art experts so far have been successfully opposing the move, but last October again, there was an official letter of the senior hierarchy in the church to reminding the prime minister about the move of the Anchishati icon.
Tamara, yeah. 1 minute.
Oh, really? Okay. So we witness here empirical expression of nationalism, whether it is about national treasure. Yes, because there is one more slide I wanted to show, and I want to comment on this, that because of a special agreement, the special agreement, church is free from the land and property of the church is free from taxes, and this resulted recently in making the church the biggest owner of forests in Georgia. So that's one of the monastery with a forest. So one last point I want to make. This is according to the Article 11. Yes, the state acknowledges material and moral damage inflicted upon church during the 19th and 20th centuries as a result of occupation by the Tsarist Russia first and later the Soviet regime, and takes responsibility for partly compensating material damage. So this statement first appeared in 1990. It's interesting, when the Council of Ministers of Soviet Socialist Republic of Georgia issued it, but political situation has changed in 91, declaring independence. And then from 2002, as you see on this chart, Every year there goes budget money to the church, which was under 1 million, and then from 2000 or 2009, it's been steadily around 25 million lari. So it's local currency. So I don't have a chart which includes following years, but this continues, and even local municipalities in Georgia pay diocese certain amount of money. For instance, in 2021, Tbilisi municipality transferred 1 million lari to the church. So this is very shortly about some realities or about the church and state. So, but I'm sure you will have some questions later, which I'll be happy to answer. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Tamara, very much. If you could take down the share screen, thank you. So that was a wonderful introduction to the very complex relations between the state and the Orthodox Church of Georgia. Now we're going to turn to Ketevan, who is going to talk about the everyday aspects of religiosity in Georgia, which Ketevan has been working on, particularly with youth over the last few years. So Ketevan, please.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to speak here today. First of all, my heart goes out to my friends in Ukraine and to everybody there. And yesterday, Russian forces bombed a maternity ward there. And the least I can do is to say that this should be stopped. And I'm saying this in the hope that words really can do something and they can achieve something. My focus today is religion as it is experienced in everyday life. Focus on lived religion is not accidental. Surveys show that traditional measures of religiosity, such as attendance of services, are quite in contrast with very high importance of religion in everyday life. So approximately 75% of people say that religiosity is important or very important in their everyday lives. So I was interested to look what is really happening in this everyday religiosity. As Tamara also showed in the last chart, especially the relationship between the church and the state is marked by negotiations and competition. And this is visible on macro level and on micro level alike. You can read this contestation in spaces too. If you look at the cityscape of Tbilisi, it shows how the state and the church compete for spaces by hyperbuilding, to use the term of Ayhva Ong. Large futuristic buildings stand surrounded by numerous newly erected, often oversized churches. Their form and architecture touch upon debates about identity. The state has been building to create a new Georgia with architecture far removed from the existing style of the old Tbilisi. The Georgian Orthodox Church builds in a traditional way, replicating and multiplicating existing forms, as you see here. They both attempt to define landscape. If we turn to micro level, we can see that schools for general education are another realm where the state and the church compete and where school community creates its own third space marked by in-betweenness. Public schools are a space which has been deliberately designated as a secular space. In 2005, the Georgian parliament passed a law on general education, restricting the teaching of religion, the use of religious symbols in the school space for devotional purposes, as well as forbidding indoctrination and proselytism in public schools. The law still allows for the celebration of national holidays and historical dates, the organization of events aimed at fostering national and human values, as well as teaching the history of religions as an elective, but almost nobody does it. The changes indirectly address the issue of the institutional independence of public schools from the growing influence of the Georgian Orthodox Church. Its growing influence was reflected and solidified in the law regarding general education adopted in 1997 under the Shevardnadze government. It enabled the Georgian Orthodox Church to be actively involved in education. Later, the importance of the church became even more reinforced when the constitutional agreement between the state and the church was legalized, as Tamara already showed. In general, the state expected public schools to stay independent from the church and to treat every religious denomination in the same manner. This law has been in line with the strong secularization and modernization discourse of the new Georgian government after the Rose Revolution in 2003, at least initially. It should also end proselytism and help build a new type of multi-ethnic and multi-religious national state. The discourse of the state has been framing the change as modern and European. The new law triggered fears of losing Georgianness in wider public. School reform has been perceived as bringing secular indoctrination, the abolishment of history, I'm quoting some newspapers, the rooting out of Georgianness, and the loss of the very essence of self, as they would say. The fear of losing identity while facing increasing globalization is nothing unusual, since in Georgia, ethnic identity was so closely connected to religious identity. Every attempt to remove religion from the classroom was perceived as an attack on this identity as well. Even though the state initiated this change, it was actively negotiating and maneuvering. As one of the decision makers of the education reform told me, every change, every step to diminish the role of the church in schools had its price, often monetary. And you saw it on the last slide, the number of budget, or the change in the budget. The changes were negotiated between the parliament, the government, and the church at the top level, and this continues. The implementation of this law became very problematic because of covert resistance of schools. In the years to follow, some creative responses to the imposed restrictions emerged. And we see this active role of people, bad or good, how they really have their agency and act. Facing imposed strategies, people employed tactics. As it remains a front stage matter for many to display their personal religious affiliation and that of the entire school, many schools use alternative spaces such as entrances and corridors and time slots outside of instructions, digital representations of the schools on social networks to avoid imposed regulations. It is very typical to always find some tactics to avoid regulations. It's common to conduct religious pilgrimages, visit religious monuments, openly invite religious authorities from the church to participate in events, and let them also perform blessing rituals for the entire schools after or prior to school time, thus maneuvering around restrictions. As one of the students remembered during my fieldwork, that one of the teachers told them to pray in heart. The word the teacher used was gulshi, in the heart. This was one of the ways in which this relocation of religiosity took place to the heart, to a camouflaged space, or to a camouflaged time, to use the notions of Michel de Certeau. But it is not total obedience to one power, in this case of the church. By designing shrines and displaying the icons, schools are approaching in countless ways, as Certeau would say. They create kind of third space, a hybrid space. I use this notion developed by Ed Soja to talk about the creative use of space, how public schools in Georgia, conceived as secular spaces, are creatively used also for religious purposes, but for many other purposes as well. Furthermore, this is a great lens, third space, to look beyond such binaries as secular versus religious, modern versus traditional, religious, non-religious, etc. The school acts as a quasi-religious building. I'm showing you now one picture from my fieldwork that is a good example for it. It uses religion to its own ends. It shapes the space accordingly. During my ethnography, I often encountered self-made shrines with Orthodox Christian icons and candles right at the threshold of public schools, side by side with patriotic inscriptions, human rights declaration, and posters calling for a more better environmental protection. Often students entering the school must pass the icon corner to proceed to the classrooms. Teachers hope that children will behave better, they will have more respect for the space. The school needs this kind of legitimation to increase its own symbolic meaning, to create a threshold evoking a response in students that they are entering something special. The school itself steals this space from the church by making its own space sacred for its own purposes. It gets the legitimation to act as a metaphorical temple. Schools and universities in Georgia are often referred to as sacred, as temples of knowledge or holy temples, alluding to the very high importance in the metaphorical sense. The school imitates the church and the church imitates the school. Priests in Georgia often act as teachers, also in a literal sense, as the name of a priest chosen as a spiritual father or an advisor is motzhuari, teacher in Old Georgian. They become key figures in shaping everyday life. I will talk about it later a little bit. Religiosity is very much present in the classrooms, especially in the rooms for literature, history, and art. Often schools rely on in-betweenness and multivalence of symbols. Displays are religious and secular at the same time because they are often also historical. Schools often combine patriotic discourse with religious and didactical functions. When choosing the pictures for the classroom display, you see here history classroom, there are usually beatified historical figures and writers. The adoration of historical figures, writers, and scientists in general has a long history in different cultures. Georgia is no exception to this. The Soviet era, with its proclaimed atheism, gave rise to the cult of writers, historians, and scientists. Everybody who is a historian working on Georgia knows how dangerous it is to do research about history because everything is sacred there. They are revered. Their words are repeated daily in memorization as homework. The students are rewarded when they manage to stay very close to the original formulations perceived as true. Even though the new national curriculum tries to encourage analytical skills in students, critical attitudes are not expected and in many cases not tolerated. In addition to this, the Georgian church beatified many of the writers and scholars after late 80s. Now they are poets, scientists, writers, and at the same time saints. This duality often helps schools overcome restrictions and display the pictures in classrooms. So spaces can dominate the authority of the displays, disciplines, and imposes meanings. One student from an East Georgian village told me during the conversation, I remember that they had a display of writer turned saint Ilya Chevchavadze here on the picture. The students dropped the picture of him and wanted to add some more mustache or some eyebrows, as is very common in Georgian schools. And then he exclaimed, "You can do this, he's a saint." And everybody else got painted, but not him. And this was for him, as Georgi explained me, just a way to be a better Georgian. The school shapes its space and uses religiosity to meet its own ends, thus not completely obeying the dominant church. Students also assemble their identities. When asked about who they are or what it means to be Georgian, not surprisingly, students as well teachers will start explaining their Georgian identity from historical perspective, how they came to be as they are now. The display of Orthodox Christian symbols in public schools alludes to one of the central roles of religion in public spaces. The church is increasingly there in public space as a safeguard of collective memory. And history teachers and literature teachers often see themselves as their counterparts in these schools. They act like ersatz priests, guardians of memory and identity. What the students and teachers declare by performing religiosity is foremost their Georgianness. The discourse around Georgianness is built along the axis of nostalgia, and many pictures in displays also kind of evoke different, by picturing different places, they evoke different times.
Katie, one more minute.
Yeah, we cannot talk about youth as a uniform category. It also very much depends on resources they have available and the environment they are part of. In villages I work, different actors as well as labor migration played a role in shaping the hybrid identities of these students. Topics regarding changing times, new demands, being European, being green, being members of groups that are not tied to locally pervade the discourse among the youth in these villages. What I saw is kind of third space marked by hybridity. We have examples when religious symbols are tactically used for various purposes, but it is always quite dangerous to use them for facing dominant power. The popularity of church is not surprising, especially in areas where there is nothing else, there are no public spaces. The popularity of church as an institution is strongly linked with the popularity and worship of its authorities, living or deceased. This can be seen as a continuation of expectation of a master magician who can take care of everything. At many levels, we see the need to build new cults and obey an entire chain of authorities, from symbolic to historical and real. The priest positions himself as an authoritative father and teacher who can decide what is right and wrong. They enjoy an image of a man who has a solid safety net, acknowledges his duties, and is devoted to his parish. To end on a better note, I will give you just an example where negotiations lead to something good. I did research in a multi-ethnic village and saw how everyday peace is continuously reaffirmed in the tradition of inviting Muslim godparents to baptize Christian children. In local practices surrounding the Orthodox ritual of christening, Muslims can be recruited to the role of godparents, normally restricted to Christians, while at the same time remaining Muslim. In this way, the pool of available participants is extended to the whole community, allowing it to produce alliances and express solidarities between neighboring families of different faiths. And perhaps the most enduring mythic feature of the Caucasus is the way that its diversity is attended by diplomacy. There's a potential and experience of diplomacy in everyday religion, and I hope people in the Caucasus will hold to these practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ketty. That was very interesting, trying to examine the actual practice, if you like, of religion in schools in contrast to the regulations and what the Constitution and the educational law tries to create. The church obviously is deeply entangled into the everyday life of Georgians, including education. Right. So anyway, thank you for that. That was very enlightening. So now I'm going to turn over to Eka, and Eka is going to bring us up to date. I think Eka, as I said, is the director of the Tolerance and Diversity Institute, which focuses on the question of rights, human rights, and religious rights in relation to the dominant Orthodox Church. So, Eka, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hello everyone. I'm very also honored to be able to present at this panel after the brilliant presentations of my colleagues. In my speech, I would focus, as Stephen mentioned, on the human rights framework and policy of the state towards freedom of religion or belief in Georgia, its relation to the dominant religious group, Orthodox Church, and minorities. However, as my colleagues taking into consideration the current context, Russia's invasion into Ukraine and the ongoing horror war, it's impossible not to mention these events. And watching Ukraine under Russian attack is deeply personal for us Georgians. Now the West has witnessed how Vladimir Putin reenacted his Georgia playbook. And I want to express my solidarity and support to brave Ukrainians. And at the same time, I feel very shameful for the decisions and rhetoric of the government of Georgia, who try their best to appease the Russia, the aggressor. And they never mentioned and condemned the actions of Russia, using always a passive voice, as if some supernatural power invaded Ukraine and is killing civilians. So in the same vein, it's surprising the Georgian Orthodox Church has been also silent for quite a while about the actions of the aggressor, not mentioning the sacred word Russia. And moreover, the patriarch of the Georgian Orthodox Church, Ilya II, recently said that wars occur in some countries, even not mentioning the name Ukraine, and that we try to avoid being involved. So in social media, the narratives of some Orthodox priests show that they conceptualize this war as an ideological battle between Russia and the West, and as if Ukraine is punished because of its liberal policies. And Zelensky is referred as a gay activist who dragged Ukraine into this war that could be actually evaded. And we see identical narratives of the Russian Orthodox Church. Patriarch Kirill also stated, as you know, that Donbass was punished because people there did not want gay prides. And he reiterated that this is the value conflict, first of all. And here we see how religious institutions in Georgia and Russia as anti-liberal forces legitimize the war against democracy and freedom with the pretext of the global war against Orthodox values. Luckily, then later some hierarchy priests expressed their solidarity, condemned the actions of Russia, and also 15 religious organizations, minority religious organizations under the auspices of public defender. They also unequivocally condemned Russia's aggression in Ukraine. So here I want to go back to the main points of my speech. What is the framework of relationship between the state, the Orthodox Church, and Orthodox communities in Georgia? And to have a little introduction, the recent history of Georgia after gaining political independence in the 1990s can be somehow construed according to different forms of nationalism and political transitions. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, during the first tenure of the government was characterized by ethnic nationalism. Later, the state politics were shifted to a system of more elite-mediated liberalism in the 1992-2003. And during these years, the Georgian Orthodox Church acquired legal and ideological recognition, and Tamara was talking about this. In 2002, the constitutional agreement was signed between the state and the GOG, granting special status and legal privileges to the church. Since the state institutions were very weak, government authorities used the GOG for gaining political legitimacy. And in return, the church also started receiving material and legislative benefits from the state. Since 2003, the state on the levels of both policy and official discourse stopped differentiating between its citizens according to their ethnic backgrounds and defined citizenship as the main marker of the Georgian identity. The government started protecting the rights of non-dominant religious communities and punishing extremists for hate crimes. However, it did not stop using using the church for political legitimacy. And as a result, a number of crimes motivated by religious hatred significantly decreased. However, the level of education and acceptance of diversity in the society has not increased sufficiently. And Katy talked greatly about this dynamics in public schools. The state has adopted non-discriminatory legislation in general education, harmonized with international obligations and Forbes standards, but the problem of religious indoctrination in public schools still exists. So since 2012, after the change of the government, the Forbes status and state religion relations changed again. The GOG interfered more actively with political and legislative matters, and in certain cases has been influencing the content of the legislation. And I see there in the QA, there is a question about anti-discrimination law. And I would just briefly say that, yes, they were against, the church was against adopting the anti-discrimination law. But this was the case when it was anyway adopted. But we can talk about the repercussions and what happened later, maybe during the discussion. The state increased, at this time, the state increased material support for GOG, and Tamara mentioned the rise of the state funding by giving a big amount of property and land also free of charge, in addition to direct state funding. Simultaneously, the government's response to the crimes committed on the grounds of religious intolerance became weaker, and it encouraged similar violations of FORB and increased the statistics of uninvestigated hate crimes. And for instance, from 2012 to 2016, we've seen 8 large-scale violations of Muslims' rights in different geographical regions of Georgia. Muslims were banished from the villages. They were forbidden to pray in their houses of worship. The minaret was removed forcefully, and so on. And none of these cases, almost none of these cases were investigated. In 2014, the government created a special entity focused on religious matters, the State Agency for Religious Issues. This agency clearly demonstrated that it's a tool of Soviet tactics for the government to control and influence religious communities. And today, because of the growing control and interference of the state into the autonomy of religious institutions, the situation regarding freedom of religion or belief is rather alarming. So now, where these problems come from? Today, the legislative framework on FORB is basically good. There are some discriminatory clauses and norms, but overall discrimination is a matter of poor enforcement of the law rather than legislation itself. So for instance, building houses of worship, it's been a challenge for Muslims and other religious groups in Georgia. For instance, Muslims who comprise more than 10% of the Georgian population have not been able to build a second mosque in Batumi city, and they were praying under the open air. In 2000, and I can share, 1 minute, I can share you the picture. So, this is, okay. So you see, this is the how Muslims are praying outside of the mosque, because the existing one can't accommodate the number of the parish. And in 2016, the city hall denied the community a building permit, and it was an unsubstantiated claim. Denial. They were saying the city hall was saying that this was a residential area, while in fact in the same area there are 6 churches, Orthodox churches built. So of course it was a political decision, and not to allow the construction of the mosque in Batumi and to appease the Georgian Orthodox Church. And in such cases, when manifestation of freedom of religion or belief is violated, the state often uses the argument of peaceful coexistence, and it means avoiding the legal resolution of the conflicts. It means prioritizing the will of the majority at the expense of denying certain rights to the minorities. But finally, in 2021, the court ruled that the city hall's denial to issue a permit was illegal, and it was discrimination. Non-Orthodox communities have other systemic property problems, like restitution of the property confiscated during the Soviet times. And you know that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, only the Orthodox Church was able to restore their ownership on confiscated property, while other religious groups like Armenian Apostolic, Catholic, Evangelical Lutheran, Muslim, and Jewish communities, they were not given such a possibility. So further, the church was endowed with the property of other religious organizations as well. So I want just briefly to show you some of the illustrations that is the who have been in Batumi, maybe seen the Catholic Church, former Catholic Church. Now it's an Orthodox church, and it historically belonged to the Catholic Church. Then, oh, excuse me. Okay, this is another Armenian church. It's also demolished, and Armenian Church claims its ownership, but Orthodox Church also claims its ownership. So it's now frozen somehow. It has the frozen status. It's another one, mosque in the Abastumani village, also demolished one. And this is a synagogue in Akhaltsikhe, also half demolished inside and without care, left without any care. So there are many challenging issues in the policy, but I don't have time to talk all about them, of course. However, an overarching problem is that the state is failing to distance itself from the church and ensure equal treatment for all religious communities. It was manifested also during the COVID pandemic, when the church became the only institution who did not abide by the restrictions, and they did not stop gatherings while it was threatening to public health. And also we saw that the state lifted some restrictions on gatherings during religious holidays, only for the Orthodox, for instance, for the Orthodox Christmas, and not on December 25th. And they explained because Catholics and other groups are in a minority. And we are an Orthodox country. This was also the statement of the then Prime Minister to justify these privileges of the Orthodox Church. And this narrative about majority, minority, and somehow weighing who has more rights, this discourse was evident in other cases too. And it's also related to the issue of the impunity of the Orthodox clergy. And in this context, the most emblematic event was on July 5th, 2021, and this image, which was circulating in media. So this was the day when the extremist groups supported by the Georgian Orthodox clergy ransacked the offices of several LGBT organizations in the Georgian capital and attacked journalists. So this was the result of this attack. And human rights defenders wanted to gather to mark an International Day against homophobia and transphobia, and more than 30 journalists were injured and one died even afterward. The Georgian Orthodox Church mobilized supporters with a claim to protect Georgian values and traditions. And of course, they were not only the clergy, they were just mobilizing the people, and there were extremist groups and so-called far-right group representatives who were actually attacked the people, peaceful people. And yes, nobody again was punished for this violence. So I will just stop sharing. Now, what was again the response of the state? The state failed to defend the freedom of assembly and health of the participants, and the statement of the Prime Minister of Georgia was especially alarming, as he openly declared that he did not intend to defend the rights of minorities and that minorities could not set the agenda for the majority in Georgia. And that statement concerned all minorities and not only sexual minorities. So the main aspects of the state's relation towards religious group include preferential treatment towards the Orthodox Church and unequal discriminatory treatment of other communities. Another aspect of the state policy that I want briefly to touch upon is a matter of state security. International human rights standards, especially OSCE guidelines, clearly they clarify that FORB and security are not competing rights, but complementary, independent, and mutually reinforcement objectives that can and must be advanced together. However, topics of FORB and security have long been linked in Georgia in a way that undermines both. And a recent leak of the alleged state security service materials in 2021 in Georgia came as a shock, as it revealed that religious civil society organizations, media, and people defending human rights had been subjected to state illegal massive surveillance and eavesdropping. And security services intruded into such a private space as a confession between the clergy and the parish. They have been collecting these materials possibly later to blackmail certain clergy because of their sexual orientation. And in some cases, it shows that the state had even information on crimes allegedly committed by the Orthodox clergy. But they—
I can give you one more minute.
Yeah. Information not to investigate and to use for their own benefit. So, and of course, such intrusion into autonomy and privacy totally undermines fundamental principles of FORB and other human rights. And to sum up, today, church-government relations are still based on the paradigm of pragmatic mutual benefits. The government still uses the church for legitimacy and as an identity marker. And on the other hand, the church is still receiving big financial support from the state, as well as pursuing their business interests. So far, I was talking mainly on the human rights framework of the state regarding fork, but as there is a question also in Q&A, I would just briefly say that the church has taken also a consistently anti-liberal stance on human rights, most notably in its promotion of the concept of so-called traditional values. And we see here that almost identical narratives with the Russian Orthodox Church. And in this context, GOG has been playing an active role to keep Georgia in a Russian sphere of influence as it pursues confrontation with the West in ideological terms.
Eka, thank you very much. Obviously a very, very critical presentation looking at the activities of the church today. What it reminds us of is the centrality of the Orthodox Church of Georgia in Georgian politics today. It also reminds us of the multi-denominational nature of Georgian society and Georgian history. You mentioned that Georgian society consists of many different religions, Judaism, Islam. The Baptists are an important religious minority, Pentecostals of one kind or another. So, that's a very important thing to remember and to stress when we're talking about the role of the Georgian Orthodox Church in Georgian society. Clearly, other religions too need equal protections. Thank you very much for that. We are now open to questions. We have a lot of questions, and I would encourage you to keep putting your questions into Q&A. I have a couple of questions here, one from Katie Shubitidze and another from Megan Clark, who is a student of mine here at Harvard. And the question concerns the role of the Orthodox Church, the Georgian Orthodox Church, vis-a-vis the Russian Orthodox Church, and also the question of recognition of the autocephaly of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. What is the position of the Georgian Orthodox Church on the recognition of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church? Can we start perhaps with Tamara?
Okay. The Georgian Orthodox Church of Georgia refuses to, does not take it seriously to acknowledge the autocephaly. Also, the question, I read the question, it is about whether all other Orthodox churches, because we know there are 14 to 15 local Orthodox churches, and unfortunately, so far, only the Church of Greece and the Patriarchate of Alexandria recognize the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The thing is that in Orthodoxy, you have to understand that only Romanians and Georgians are sort of ethnically independent Orthodox groups, because there's a large group of Greek-speaking churches, which is Antioch, and Antioch is also Arabic, but it's Greek Orthodox Church of Antioch, it says, but still it's a satellite of Russian church. So there are Greeks like Alexandria and Church of Greece who recognize, but all the satellites of Russian Orthodox Church certainly are not recognizing. This is Serbia, Bulgaria, and Georgia. So yes, and
Tamara, could
Syria,
I ask?
Could
I add to that? Is this, do you think, for political reasons, or are there theological reasons for non-recognition?
No, theologically, Ukraine, because it's so. If you, that's why in my when I was talking about Ukraine, I said that Russia does not recognize sovereignty. So as far as you recognize the sovereignty, according to today's situation and how we treat and how we understand autocephaly, then a sovereign, because it's a territorial principle in the church, then a sovereign country has all the rights to claim autocephaly for a church. And in Ukraine, I present it in a very sketchy way. I mean, there were really serious attempts during these periods of independence, but also during the Second World War, for instance. They tried to establish autocephaly, but always, the Russia is very reluctant to agree to this, as we understand. And it's a very serious political issue.
Okay, we have a question, another question here from Megan Clark. What has been the Orthodox Church of Georgia's response to the law on the elimination of all forms of discrimination that was passed in 2014? And what is the Georgian Orthodox Church's relationship to Protestants, Armenians, and Catholics, and Muslims and others? I think I could turn this over to Keti. What is the current situation? What is the reaction? What has any progress been made since that law was passed in 2014 in terms of the equality of different religious denominations in Georgia?
Thank you so much for this question, and many questions also allude to this question. I don't believe so. It is maybe Eka can answer better, but from my experience working with, especially with the Lutheran Church and German community in Georgia, I saw how sometimes over the years some programs has been made, but then the laws which have been abolished in recent years would not change the situation. And the main reason behind it is that to understand this situation, the Georgian Orthodox Church is #1 institution in terms of trust. If you ask people which institution you trust the most, #1 is the church, and #2 is the army, and then the ministers, etc. They come really far behind. So to understand the power of the church and why they cannot intervene, and why cannot also somehow say something about the landscape or the mosques built in Batumi, etc. One has to understand this. And the Council of Religions, it also did not change anything in better direction. Eka, as an human rights activist, will know better. Maybe you can add something to it.
So let me ask Eka if she can also address. There's a question here from Andrea Gambarotto about the relationship between the Georgian Orthodox Church and Muslims in Georgia, and you mentioned this already, Eka, in your slides. And the question is, how has the representation of Muslim Georgians changed, if it has changed, in the last 30 years? And is the treatment in terms of perhaps the opposition to the rights of Muslims in Georgia, is it promoting radicalization on both sides?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a quite a complex question requiring a complex answer. Well, representation of Muslims. So it has many aspects, like representation of Muslims in politics, representation in the public space, in education system, on many levels. So first, we have the first parliamentarian, Tariel Nakaidze, who was the head of the Georgian Muslims Union, and he's quite vocal about Muslim rights. So it's very good that he's kind of the voice of the Muslim people in the parliament. But actually, I mentioned just one episode. It was construction of the mosque, in Batumi, and it was debated, and Muslims were denied their rights for years and years. And even now, they can build still after the decision of the court. They still can't build the mosque. So clearly, building houses of worship is a manifestation of FORB, and it's quite limited for Muslims. Another issue is the perception of their identity in the public, because at school, because of the textbooks and because of the attitudes of teachers, they're frequently told that they're kind of they should change they should convert to Christianity, because the Islam is a religion of violence, and so the ancestors, they were converted forcefully, and so it's a sense of shame. And actually, one of the Georgian anthropologists, so she has an excellent work on this sense of the shame, how they feel in the Georgian society, and then also their representation, their representation in the public space, their representation in the education field, and another issue. Also, there is a difference between Georgian Muslims, ethnically Georgian Muslims, and ethnically Azerbaijani Muslims. They're perceived differently because of this ethnic identity of Georgian. Sometimes Georgian Muslims are perceived more critically rather than ethnic Azerbaijani Muslims. And ethnic Azerbaijani Muslims also now, activists, they try to present their identity as Georgians, not only as ethnic Azerbaijani and Armenians, but as citizens of Georgia. So I can talk about this, but I don't.
Yeah.
I think that's
okay. Yeah, thanks very much. I have a question here from Paul Krago, a very good friend of mine, who asks Tamara a question. Could you say something, he says, more about the property issues regarding the Georgian church? Tamara, you talked about this, and clearly the Georgian church is one of the largest landowners currently in Georgia, as well as being quite a prosperous organization. Can you talk more about, Paul asks, about the issues of minority religions and the question of this contest over property?
Thank you. First of all, I raised my hand, which you did not notice, Stephen. I wanted to add to what Eka was saying. She was talking mostly because the question was about Muslims, but this difficulty of not allowing other religions and also confessions to build their worship places is a very big problem in this country. But it's not always related directly to the church. The society is in a way functioning in a way that they do not want to give this right. Like state officials, they not even at a higher level, but at the municipal level or local level, they try to sort of not to give this order that not to allow them to build this. And this is also very interesting, because sometimes they don't go to ask permission to the church, because maybe we don't know what church will say, but locally, these problems are resolved locally. They are not allowed to. This was the case with the Catholic Church, for instance, in Rustavi. For years, they were, not allowed to build a church. Eventually, I think they've got this, because after the Pope's visit in 2016, I think somehow they reached it. Now, about the property issue that Paul, thank you, Paul, for asking this question. Well, I know I don't have now on slides, this numbers, and I can give you only a general sort of answer to this question, apart from the chart which I showed, that certainly church is given a paramount access to national land and national treasure, which other churches in Georgia or other religious groups cannot even dream of. So this is truly the most sort of, as I call it, physical or empirical expression of the religious nationalism, Orthodox nationalism in Georgia. This grabbing of territories and lands. the church, when it was the case with forests recently, because it was the most recent case with forests, they promised to take good care of it, but we don't know. That's we'll see.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. So Christopher Hawkins, another of students of mine, asked this question. Is there any mechanism or desire of the government of Georgia to give money for the restoration or upkeep of religious sites of other religions besides the Georgian Orthodox Church? And I'm going to hand that over to you, Eka. And then I want to come to Keti to sort of extend that question and think about the role of other religions in schools. So Eka, why don't you try and answer that question first?
Yes. Thank you for the question. Since as we're talking about the state funding of the church, because of the criticism of the state policy in 2014, after the establishment of the State Agency of Religious Issues, which I mentioned, the state started funding for religious organizations, for religious groups. And they called it compensation, a partial compensation of the damages inflicted during the Soviet times. But in legal sense, it's not the compensation as the same as it's not as the funding of GOK is not the compensation of the damages inflicted during the Soviet times, because in order to have the compensation, you have to first calculate, then define the time frame during which these damages should be reimbursed and compensated. So it was not. It's just direct funding. The model, the same concept was implemented in relation to other religious organizations, just to silence that, okay, we're not funding only one group, but we are funding also others. The problem is that what really matters for Catholics, for Muslims, Armenian Apostolic Church, and Jewish is a return of their historical property, and not giving them some share of money, because again, it's not the restitution. And we see that in the center of Tbilisi, Armenian churches, which are the cultural heritage sites, they are crumbling, and they cannot restore it because they cannot touch it, because it has they are disputed sites between the Orthodox Church and Armenians, as well as like Catholic sites and others. So in some cases, but mostly it's the problem of the will of the state to make this step.
Right. And Keti, if you could talk a little bit about the role of religious minorities in schools.
Yes, sure. This is a great question. It was prior to this law, it was really very problematic for many religious minorities in schools, as the church was very actively proselytizing. And then it was kind of relief for many. I worked in multi-ethnic villages, and then they said that prior to 2005, there were religious pictures in classrooms at schools. It were cutouts, and priests would come and really inflict the shame in students. But then it was kind of banned. It was camouflaged, but in some schools they really could succeed in banning this kind of proselytism. But the state also is kind of confused. It is not only the initiative of teachers that they try to camouflage, the state does it as well. For example, there was recently, 2 years ago, I think that in Samtre, in a region where there are a lot of religious minorities, the regional administration presented the graduates with the city budget with the icons, and then for the 2 Muslim students, we gave them some pictures or so. They are always kind of trying to avoid this topic, but do not know how to really implement it. Additional law that also hinders this inclusion of people, etc., is recently they introduced a day of consecration to Virgin Mary. And when this was introduced to celebrate this day, teachers were called and the trainings were there to implement new course or lectures, lessons about how Georgia is a country that is consecrated to Virgin Mary. And this for Muslim kids sitting in the school was, of course, something that would put them in not a very good life position. Yeah, and this is in short. But about everyday practices, Christopher asked this as well. There are a lot of networking practices, and people do a lot of work to maintain peace in everyday life, only if the institutions would let them be.
Thank you, Katie. So I'm going to end with one question, and all three of you can chime in. It comes from Paul, and I do apologize if I haven't covered all the questions. We don't have the time. Lots of interesting ones, but I will finish with this one. Paul asks, and I think it can be directed to all of you. Could you say more about the Orthodox Church's use of purity as a theological or ethical concept used against LGBTQ and persons whose, quote, sin disqualifies them from human rights protection? So this is a question that concerns the relationship or the attitude of the Orthodox Church of Georgia towards homosexuality. And obviously it's one of the issues that has given perhaps most bad publicity to Georgia in the world. But maybe we should start with you, Eka, and then Katie and Tamara.
Yes. Well, I briefly also mentioned this data, Idaho, and violent dispersal of LGBT communities in the streets in 2013, and then in the last years, and finally in 2021. And the main argument behind the rhetoric of the church was that it's simple. And it can become rampant, and that it will be then legal, this marriage, the same-sex marriage, all this capitalization on these narratives. And one of the arguments is, yes, that it's sinful and that it's against national, and then they relate it to some kind of national discourse, that it's against national traditions. They try to kind of frame it in political terms. Actually, other religious communities are more or less silent about the issue, and they condemned the violence on May 17 in previous years also. The Council of Religions, under the auspices of Public Defender. There are many organizations, minority organizations, who are united against the common problems, challenges, and they mostly discuss human rights issues. And one of the most vocal to defend the rights of LGBT communities is Evangelical Baptist Church, and they many times they address the society, they condemn the violence, and also they kind of open their doors to LGBT communities. So it's a very nice precedent that that's
right.
The support of how the church can open its doors, and how can change, how the church can receive religious community, receive LGBT communities.
Good. Thank you, Eka.
Have the dialogue.
Katie, would you like to say something?
Yeah, very short, because as I said everything. Paul, I think that there is this pollution fear, and it is attached to everybody that does not belong to a very homogeneous group. And these are you can see how many different groups, ethnicities, belongings are out of the structure the church sees as normal. This is my short answer.
Right. Okay. And Tamara, because maybe you could tackle this theologically in terms of what this concept of purity means.
Well, I would not use this word purity, but certainly all Christians have a difficulty to accept it. You know, some it's about a liberal wing and more conservative wing, sort of, among the Christians. But Orthodox Church in general, not only in Georgia, in general, does not certainly accept homosexuality. But I must tell you now that I've conducted a small study on it. And you have to, if we speak about theology, we have to make a difference. What is a church teaching and how this issue is treated pastorally. So when I had interviews with several priests, it was years ago, this work is published in one of the volumes on human rights and orthodoxy. So when I conducted this interviews, priests from different countries, I didn't interview anyone in Georgia, I must say, but in different countries, all of them were saying that certainly they would try to have some kind of conversation and, with their flock who are in homosexual relationships, but they do not follow this instructions, like formal instructions that these people should not attend the church or they should be punished. They try to work with them and not always. Some of them would say yes, but some of them would say not for the reason of changing their mind or re-educating or changing their orientation, but just to help them spiritually to deal with this problem. With the Georgian case, I think the biggest problem is that they, especially in Georgian, it's, the term, all of you, those who know Georgian, will understand what I mean. They cannot make a distinction between homosexuality and pedophilia. Pedophilia is certainly a crime and should be treated separately from homosexuality. But, for instance, I would... it's not very popular in Georgia, but I like how Pope Francis at some point, tried to make this distinction. And he said that there is zero tolerance when it refers to children and to people of younger, non-adult children. Right. But other cases are different from this. So there are no further comments. I think he does not try to speak too much about.
Of course, pedophilia, a major problem for the Catholic Church. And
not only.
So, okay, well, I would like to thank you all very much. That was really enlightening, I think. I hope so for our audience as well. That's why we managed to go the full time here, because we had lots of interesting responses from the audience. Thank you again very much. And I hope to meet you again in some other format talking about these issues. I should say, by the way, that the program in Georgian Studies only exists because of funding by the Georgian government. We received a significant amount of money in order to establish this program. But I think it's clear from this panel that we are an academic program with full independence, and our mission is to examine critically all aspects of Georgian politics, history, and society. Again, I just wanted to make sure we understand that. Thank you all again, and good luck back in Georgia, and wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.